So I was in junior high. I'm going to talk and walk over here at the same time. I was in junior high, and I had signed up for a mountain bike club. I had just gotten a mountain bike, and part of the requirement for being in mountain bike club was I had to go get a physical. I was in junior high, and like junior high, our family was still seeing our pediatrician, and like this was like a baby doctor in my mind. I mean, 13, we'll see a baby doctor. That's ridiculous. I'm almost a grown man, but like my mom's like, well, I'll let you walk from school after school down the street to your appointment. Prove that you're almost a grown man. So I walked down the street. Now, if you know anything about me, it's not so much that I don't have a good sense of direction. It's that sometimes that my brain is not connected to the outside world. I live inside my head sometimes. Like I can explore many worlds and many levels of many worlds without leaving my brain. This has always been true. And so I was walking the direction that I thought that was to the doctor's office. We'd been going to this doctor's office since I was a little kid. And I walked, and I'm walking down the street carrying my trumpet, my backpack full of books, and nothing looks familiar. Nothing looks familiar. I'm not going the right direction, but I don't know which direction is the right direction. And the problem is that instead of coming out of the school parking lot and turning left, I went out of the school parking lot and went straight and skipped over the street that I was supposed to be on. And so nothing began to look familiar. Finally, I did turn left. And you got to keep in mind, this was a long time ago. We didn't have cell phones. My mom didn't have Find My Friends on her computer to be able to track where I was. I didn't have an air tag in my backpack. And by the time I finally figure out where I am and where I'm supposed to go and end up, it's like an hour past my doctor's appointment. The doctor's office had been calling my mom at work. My mom was freaked out. My mom was at the doctor's office when I got there. And it was like this panic moment. Turns out I was not almost a full-grown man. But have you ever gotten turned around? Just be honest. Maybe it wasn't directions, but in your personal life, you got turned around. You were going the wrong direction. You had taken a left turn when you're supposed to go straight, and now you don't know how you got where you are. Nothing looks familiar. We've been looking at the story of the Sermon on the Mount. And this is the last message in this series. We've walked through 8 weeks on the Sermon on the Mount. And I don't know about you, but it's been interesting. I've read through the Sermon on the Mount hundreds of times, but I've never gone this slow. I have preached through sections and gone slower on those little pieces, but I have personally never connected the dots the way that we have been able to connect the dots throughout this series. And so it's been really interesting. Could we get that back TV? They're working on it. We're going to be looking in chapter 7 of Matthew. This is at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. So, just a reminder, the Sermon on the Mount is it's the largest chunk of teaching that we have of Jesus. There are other times where we get little pieces where he's teaching in parables in all of these different ways, but they're almost like they're a part of another story. So to understand what that parable means, you really have to understand the context of who he was talking to, where it happened, what interactions that were happening at the time. So like those pieces are a part of a larger whole. And this section, it's the largest thing where Jesus spends a good chunk of time talking to his followers. He sets out this, some say this is Jesus' manifesto. This is the way of Jesus. Other people have talked about it in a way that, in the great houses of their time, there were rules for how things operated. The house rules. And you actually see that idea of house rules come into play when you go on later on in the New Testament and you're looking at some of the things that Paul's creating. He's setting up house and creating expectations for what it means to be in the household of Jesus. So Jesus has this manifesto of things, and he ends this. He's coming to the end of this message. And he says this in verse 13. He says, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. And many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." I don't know if you had this experience the first time you heard this. Maybe this is the first time you heard this. And your first reaction is whoa. That's kind of my response the first time I heard this. Is so only a few find this way? That's scary. How will I know if I'm on the way? And that's the question that I walked away with asking when I read this. There's a way. It's narrow. Only a few find it, and I'm probably not it. That may be how you operate in the world. Some of you are wherever you go, that's the way. and I'm envious of your confidence. But let's step back a second, because this doesn't operate in isolation. Jesus has just been describing the way. He has just been talking about what the way is. He's just been telling us what the way is. And so, he doesn't say, it's not like in the Lord of the Rings where, they have to find these secret paths. He's very clear what the way is. What he is communicating is that the way that he is talking about, the path that he is talking about, is difficult. It's not difficult to find. It's difficult. And because of the difficulty, some people choose not to go that way. Now, we're going to jump to the next few verses. And again, this has happened several times throughout this studying this passage, where it feels a little bit like Jesus takes a turn, he pivots, he's changing the subject in the middle of a sentence, which lots of people do that. One of my gifts in ministry is I am really good at tracking with people who have ADHD. Like people are like, they jump over here, and I'm like, okay, but we were talking about this, helping them move along in the conversation, and but like also entertaining their rabbit trails, like that those are some really good points about that point over here. But like, and then they get to the end of the rabbit trail, like, where were we? And I'm like, we were right here. So that's a gift I bring to the table, but that's not really what's happening here. This pivot, so to speak, it's really about the way. It's really about the people who are communicating a message. The reality is that everybody in their time, the way that Jewish teachers worked was that, they would wrestle with the scriptures, and they would wrestle, and that there were different rabbis, different teachers, and following a particular rabbi. You pick a rabbi to follow, and as you follow that rabbi, you follow that teacher's way. And there are lots of messages. There's a lot of competing messages. I don't know if you've noticed that. Have you paid attention? Maybe not to the news, but the news behind the news. The news behind the news is about which way to go. Which way is the right way? Which way is the path that leads to the correct destination? And that's really what Jesus is getting at when he says this. He says, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. He goes on and he says, by their fruit you will recognize them. Who? Recognize who? Like, this is one of the things that we have to discipline ourselves to do when we're reading through a text. And this is, if you're in school, this is also helpful when you're doing your English reading. When you see these kinds of words, them and their, those refer back to something. They don't stand on their own. So the question that we ask, because sometimes we get a little distracted while we're reading, is who is the them and the there that this refers to? And it refers back to watch out for false prophets. You'll know that by their fruit you will recognize them. By their fruit, false prophets will be made, will reveal themselves. Watch out for false prophets. And he goes on to describe the process of that we go through. He doesn't at this point, he's not talking about quantity of fruit. He's not talking about whether or not the fruit is diseased. The description that he uses here in verse 16, it says, by their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes? He's saying it's not just about whether or not their fruit is good, it's whether or not they are capable of producing fruit. This image that he gives, by their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Just so you know, figs don't come from thistles. That's not where they come from. Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit. And then he pivots to talking about quality of fruit. He says, likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, and every bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. So he's talking about these people who would lead you down the other way, down a different path, down a different road, who would distract you from the way of Jesus. Again, remember, going back to the beginning, blessed are the poor in spirit, for they will inherit the kingdom of God. This manifesto describes the way. It describes the path. It describes what it looks like to be in the family of Jesus. And this description is pretty clear. It's hard to miss the road. That's not the issue. The issue is that the road is difficult. Okay? So, he's talking about these false prophets that would lead you down a different path, a different way, a different avenue. And then he goes on and he says this: every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. Again, that them referring back to those false prophets. So, we talked about this opening section, these opening verses. And it talked about this narrow gate. And I think what happens with people, I don't know if you've noticed this, people like to brag about how hard their job is. Have you noticed that? Or how hard they have it? They know that they're on the right path because, it's difficult. Difficulty isn't the only indicator that you are on the right path. It is possible, getting lost is difficult. You're out there hiking. Well, no, getting lost, the act of getting lost isn't difficult. What happens afterward can be difficult. Like, it can be steep and narrow being lost also. It can be... What? Oh. Okay. Sorry. I thought I heard somebody say Sam, like, that's my name. Especially sensitive to when I think people are saying it. It is possible to go down the wrong way and not have anybody else around you and have it be a steep and narrow path and it still be the wrong way. It is also possible for it to be a wide, open path and for it to be difficult. You can be going down the wrong way on I-25, and that will be very difficult. And you will feel opposition in that. But that does not mean that you are going the right way. I think sometimes we experience this thing where we experience opposition in what's happening to us, and we're like, well, clearly I'm going the right way then. We have this persecution mentality. We're like, we feel difficulty and we're like, oh, well, if people are opposing me, I must be doing the right thing. That's not necessarily true. People could be opposing you because you're doing the wrong thing. People could be opposing you because you're going the wrong way down I-25. Don't do that. Or 66. You did that. Yeah. Did people honk at you? Oh, good. I'm glad. The point, so Jesus, let's go back to that for a second. He says, enter through the narrow gate. Wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. It's not about the path. It's about, are we willing to follow Jesus? The question isn't, are we willing to face opposition? Are we willing to face difficult things? The question really comes down to, are we willing to follow Jesus wherever he goes? Are we willing to follow Jesus when it becomes difficult? during the Beatitudes, he talked about this idea that blessed are those who are persecuted. And some people have taken that on because they're hoping to get extra blessed by being persecuted. But they don't read the second half of that verse where it's, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, for following Jesus, for doing the thing that Jesus is telling you to do. Blessed are those who experience persecution. Not every time you feel you experience persecution is that a validation that you're doing the right thing. So let's come back to where we were. I know it's small. Does anybody have binoculars? It's smaller back there. What's that? Well, I can see it just fine. I can, yeah. Well, you want me to read it for you? It says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father. And he's just spent the last 3 chapters talking about what the will of the Father is. The will of the Father is being peacemakers. The will of the Father is this beatitude way of life. Not everyone who does the will of, but only the one who does. I said I could read it. Can I borrow your reading glasses, Bing? I know you have extra pairs. Many who will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles. And then he will tell you, then he said, then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, evildoers. See, the thing that we prioritize in life oftentimes is outcomes. We prioritize I did this thing over here. Wasn't this a good thing? Wasn't this like the things that you taught us to do, like miracles and driving out demons and all of these things? Wasn't this one of those things? And again, like we said from the very beginning, Jesus is peeling back our motivations and our motives and getting to the heart of the issue. Like, we don't follow Jesus by doing the things that Jesus did. We don't follow Jesus by performing miracles and doing the acts that he's doing. We follow Jesus by becoming more like him, and he shows this way in this whole message. When we read this as a whole, he's showing us what it means to do and live and be like him. And that's what it means to do the will of the Father. Becoming more like Jesus, not just in the acts that Jesus does. He goes on and he says, therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundations on the rock. You know, there's some interesting things if you pay attention to what's happening throughout the story of the Gospels. When you read Matthew as a whole, there's some interesting things that happen. You see that currently, while this is happening, the last phases of construction on the temple are being completed from it being rebuilt by Herod. And that temple is built on a rock. You also see throughout this story that there is a moment where Jesus tells Peter that he's the rock. Interestingly enough, the temple is destroyed about 40 years after this. Built on a rock, but yet it's destroyed. Peter, not long after Jesus' resurrection, denies Jesus, and his position feels a little precarious at that moment, and yet he's reestablished. Therefore, if anyone hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, it is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. Does anybody remember this song? Somebody want to sing it for us? The rain came down, the flood came up. No? Nobody wants to sing it? I think that's a different song. So this has become a really cool medley. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a... Does this feel like a repeat? I got copy-paste happy. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he had taught as one who had authority, not as their teachers of the law. So we've walked through this entire sermon, beginning of chapter 5. Talks about these Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the poor in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs will be the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. Talks about being salt and light. Talks about Jesus being the fulfillment of the law. He peels back our motives. He looks into our hearts. He creates this clear picture of what it means to walk on the Jesus way. He points with blinking lights at this path. What needs to happen in our own hearts, what needs to happen in our own lives, this willingness to allow God in, to come in and reveal our sin, reveal our brokenness, reveal our motivations, reveal the places in our hearts. Talks about trusting Him, trusting in His way and in His path, and that He's going to take care of us. He points at all of this. Hearing Him communicate this to make a choice. And that's what we're all faced with. We're faced with a choice. Do we follow Jesus up into, as it says in the end of the Chronicles of Narnia, when the end of the story happens and they're drawn into what the story calls, it's the heaven part of the story, and they're called higher up and deeper in, further in and higher up. Or do we go that way? Or we stay down in the valley and we convince ourselves that we're going the right way because it's difficult and it's hard and people are persecuting us and it's a challenge? Or do we follow Jesus? Do we follow Jesus up that narrow path? Do we say yes to him? Do we say yes to the work that God wants to do in our hearts and in our lives? Do we say yes to the healing that God wants to do in us and through us? See, the people that Jesus describes at the end are willing to do the healing that God wants to do through them. They're unwilling to allow God to do the work inside them. So Jesus describes this way, and I want to end this way. I want to challenge us. If I could invite the worship team back up. I want to challenge us. Are we willing to go the Jesus way? Are we willing to go the further in and the higher up, the narrow path? And not because we like to pat ourselves on the back because we're going the hard way, but because we want God to do the work that needs to be done in us. I don't know about you, but I'm not done. I'm almost done preaching. But I am not complete. The work that God has to do, and the beautiful thing is like one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible is the verse where Paul is talking about this, about the work that he does, that he's faithful to complete it and to the very end. The way that you know that you're on the Jesus path is that you're following Jesus. The way that you know that you're on the Jesus path is not just that it's difficult, it's that you're following Jesus. So, are we willing to go that way? The question isn't, do you have all of the information yet? The question isn't, are you ready for the test? The question isn't, do you know all of the things that you need to know? Because I do not know all of the things I need to know. The question is, are you willing to go the Jesus way? That's the way I want to go. The Jesus way. I want to invite you. Let's go.